Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today we're diving deep into a topic that's not just about economics, but also about the very fabric of American democracy: tariffs and the balance of power between Congress and the president. Tariffs, those taxes on imported goods, have a rich history in America. Once the lifeblood of government revenue, they've always sparked controversy. Why? Because they influence everything from trade wars to presidential politics. The Constitution grants Congress the power to levy tariffs. But over the last century, we've seen a shift. Lawmakers have delegated some of that power to the president, especially during national emergencies. But is this delegation a slippery slope? Let's rewind to Donald Trump's administration and his Liberation Day tariffs. Using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on imports from nearly all major trading partners. But were these tariffs really justified? Critics argue they weren't targeted sanctions, but rather broad strokes that raised prices for consumers and businesses alike. And for lawyers and judges, it raised a more fundamental question: did the president just rewrite trade law without Congress? Federal courts responded with a resounding yes. The Court of International Trade and the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals struck down these tariffs, emphasizing that IEEPA was never intended to grant blanket authority to presidents. They invoked the major questions doctrine, the idea that for decisions with vast economic or political consequences, Congress has to speak clearly if it wanted to delegate its tariff authority to the president. And here, Congress never authorized tariffs of this scope under emergency powers. The courts also pointed back to history. In Field v. Clark, a 1892 case, the Supreme Court upheld limited tariff delegation only when Congress clearly laid out standards. Trump's sweeping action, by contrast, had no such guardrails. But Trump's team had a counter-argument. They pointed to United States v. Curtiss-Wright, a case that acknowledged expansive presidential authority in foreign affairs. If trade is indeed a form of foreign policy, then shouldn't the president have broader powers under IEEPA? This clash is now set to be decided by the Supreme Court, and the implications are monumental. So what happens depending on how the court rules? If the court upholds Trump's tariffs, it would mark an extraordinary expansion of presidential economic power. One person could, under the guise of an emergency, reset trade rules for the entire economy. Markets would reel at the uncertainty. Investors, businesses, and foreign governments would have to assume that U.S. trade policy could change overnight without Congress. Global partners would question whether America is still a stable and predictable economic leader. The short-term effect might be protectionism. The long-term cost could be inflation, retaliation, and damage to the dollar's credibility. If the court strikes the tariffs down, it would reaffirm that Congress, not the president, holds the taxing and tariff power under Article 1 of the Constitution. It would also strengthen the major questions doctrine, signaling that executive emergency powers have limits. Economically, tariffs already collected might be refunded, consumer prices would ease, and global confidence in U.S. institutions would stabilize. But politically, it could set off a storm, with populist voices claiming the court stripped the president of tools to defend American jobs. The stakes are bigger than tariffs. This case will decide whether the president can unilaterally wield emergency powers to reshape the U.S. economy, or whether America still honors the constitutional separation of powers that anchors its stability. For global markets and for ordinary Americans buying groceries, cars, or smartphones, the outcome will ripple far beyond the courtroom. At its core, the question is simple but profound. Will the U.S. remain a country where trade and taxation rest with Congress, or will the Supreme Court hand the keys of the economy to the president? The answer will shape not just American law, but how the world sees America, as a stable democracy or as a place where one leader's emergency decree can upend the global economy. So, what do you think? How should power be balanced between Congress and the president? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more insights into the intersection of law, politics, and economics. Thanks for watching.